the country that built its capital from scratch and regretted it. There is a highway in Myanmar that is 20 lanes wide. It was built to handle the traffic of a major capital city. On most days, you can stand in the middle of it and not see a single car in either direction. The road is immaculate. The paint is fresh. The streetlights work. There is simply nowhere near enough traffic to justify its existence, and there never has been. This is Naypyidaw, the capital city of Myanmar. A city of government ministries, military compounds, luxury hotels, a world-class stadium, a zoo, and an orchid garden, built from nothing in the middle of a remote jungle valley, announced without warning in 2005, and completed in less than 3 years. A city that cost an estimated $4 billion to construct while the country it governs remains one of the poorest in Southeast Asia. A city that almost no ordinary citizen of Myanmar has ever visited, and where most foreign diplomats still refuse to live permanently because there is nothing there. This was not a planning failure. It was the plan. To understand Naypyidaw, you have to understand the man who ordered it. Senior General Then Shwe had led Myanmar's military junta since 1992. He was famously reclusive, deeply superstitious, and increasingly paranoid about the stability of his regime. By the early 2000s, the existing capital Yangon was becoming a problem. It was densely populated, economically active, and full of people who had already demonstrated a willingness to take to the streets. The 1988 pro-democracy uprising had killed thousands. Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy remained a persistent political force despite years of suppression. Yangon was a city the junta could not fully control. It was too big, too connected, and too close to the coast where a foreign naval intervention could theoretically reach government buildings within hours. Then Shwe's solution was to simply leave. The decision to move the capital was made in secret. No public announcement. No architectural competition. No urban planning consultation. Construction began in 2002 under military supervision using a workforce that included both paid laborers and, according to multiple human rights organizations, conscripted civilians from surrounding villages. The site chosen was a valley near Myanmar, roughly 320 kilometers north of Yangon, deep enough inland to be strategically defensible and remote enough that any organized civilian resistance would have to travel for hours to reach it. On November 6, 2005, a date selected by the junta's official astrologer as numerologically auspicious, 20,000 military personnel loaded their belongings onto trucks and convoys and moved to the new capital overnight. Government ministries followed within weeks. Civil servants were given almost no notice. Many were separated from their families for months. Some resigned rather than relocate. Those who went arrived to find a city that was technically functional, but felt profoundly wrong in ways that were difficult to immediately articulate. The scale of Naypyidaw is the first thing that disorients visitors. The city covers an area of approximately 7,000 square kilometers, larger than the entire country of Lebanon. Within that space, the various zones of the city are separated by enormous distances. The ministry zone, where government buildings sit in identical rows behind high walls, is kilometers away from the hotel zone, which is kilometers away from the military zone, which is kilometers from the residential areas where civil servants live in assigned housing blocks. There are no street vendors, no markets, no spontaneous gathering places, no old city, no history. Everything was built at the same time for the same purpose, and it shows in every direction you look. The ministry buildings themselves are enormous. Identically designed, identically painted, set back from wide roads behind security perimeters, flying flags in perfectly maintained grounds. They were built to project permanence and power. Inside, they are often sparsely staffed. The bureaucratic workforce that was relocated to Naypyidaw was never large enough to fill the infrastructure built to contain it. Government ministries that in Yangon had operated from cramped colonial-era buildings suddenly found themselves in palatial new facilities with more office space than they had employees. The hotel zone was built in anticipation of a tourism industry that never materialized. Dozens of large hotels were constructed along a single boulevard, each with hundreds of rooms, swimming pools, conference facilities, and restaurant menus printed in multiple languages. Occupancy rates have rarely exceeded single digits except during government-organized events. The hotels that have not closed entirely operate at losses sustained by owners with connections to the military government. Foreign tourists who do visit Naypyidaw, and there are very few, consistently describe the experience as one of the strangest they have ever had. Empty restaurants where the staff outnumber the diners by 10 to 1. Swimming pools maintained daily for guests who never come. Gift shops selling souvenirs of a city that has no reason to receive souvenirs. The 20-lane highway connects the ministry zone to the military zone via a route that bypasses the civilian residential areas entirely. This was not accidental. The road network of Naypyidaw was designed so that military convoys could move between command centers without passing through any populated area. The width was not built for civilian traffic. It was built for tanks. The same logic explains the placement of the airport, which sits on the military side of the city with runways long enough to land heavy transport aircraft, and the tunnel systems that run beneath portions of the government district whose exact function has never been publicly confirmed, but which multiple analysts believe were built as emergency shelters for senior military leadership. Here is what Naypyidaw tells you that most purpose-built capitals do not. Brasilia was built because Brazil's government wanted to project modernist ambition and draw development into the interior of the country. Canberra was built because Sydney and Melbourne could not agree on which city should be the Australian capital. Islamabad was built because Pakistan's government wanted a clean administrative center away from the chaotic density of Karachi. These were politically motivated decisions, but they were decisions made with at least some consideration of the populations they were meant to serve. Naypyidaw was built with no consideration of the population at all. It was built for the military government to survive. Survive protests. Survive sanctions. Survive potential invasion. Survive the unpredictable consequences of governing a country through force for decades. The city is not a capital in the conventional sense. It is a fortress with ministries attached. The civilian population of Myanmar has largely treated Naypyidaw as irrelevant to their lives, because it is. Economic activity remains concentrated in Yangon. Cultural life, civil society, commerce, and the informal networks that make a city function have not relocated north simply because a general decided they should. Yangon remains the real center of Myanmar in every sense that matters to ordinary people. Naypyidaw is where the government is. That is not the same thing as being where the country is. After the military coup of February 2021, which returned Myanmar to direct military rule after a brief period of democratic transition, Naypyidaw became the site of pro-democracy protests that were violently suppressed. The wide empty streets that had always felt eerie took on a different quality when protesters marched down them and soldiers fired live ammunition into crowds in a city that had been specifically designed to prevent exactly that kind of civilian presence. The design failed its most fundamental purpose. People came anyway. Today, Naypyidaw sits in a condition of suspended purposelessness. The buildings are maintained. The highways are resurfaced. The zoo still has animals, and the orchid garden still has orchids. The government ministries still function, after a fashion. But the city has not grown into itself in the way that capitals typically do. It has not attracted the restaurants, the universities, the cultural institutions, the embassies willing to relocate their full diplomatic missions, or the private investment that turns a government precinct into an actual city. It is 19 years old and it still feels like it opened last week and the guests have not arrived yet. For $1 billion. 3 years of construction. An astrologer's approval. 20,000 soldiers moving in the night. And a 20-lane highway that you can stand in the middle of on a Tuesday afternoon and not hear a single engine in any direction. That is Naypyidaw. The capital city that was built not for a country, but against one.